This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Good morning, Rabbi. We continue with what I believe is part 8 of the Titanic. And how are we doing? Are we on? Okay. And the Gemara in Yavamis, the Sugya in Yavamis on Daf Kuf Chaf Aleph and Amid Aleph, and then onto Kuf Chaf Aleph Amid Beis, tells us the basic halacha, which is codified in Shulchan Aruch, that if someone falls into Mayim Shein Lohem Soif, the halacha is the woman is not allowed to get remarried. Why? Because even though in all probability the guy did not make it through, there is a miyut that maybe of people that survive. So why didn't we see him? A current took him to the other end. He's carried into a bubble in the water. Somehow, some way, he survived the accident, and he's still alive. Why didn't we hear from him? I don't know. Maybe intentionally. He doesn't. He's taking advantage of his anonymity, his freedom. In any event, that is the conclusion of the Gemara. Nafal l'mayim shein lahem soif, loy tinase. However, v'im niseis loy teitze. If she does get married, she does not have to get divorced. So from there, we see that this is only a chashash derabanan. If it would be a chashash d'oraisa, she would have to get divorced. Fine. There's so we've mentioned that possibly if there's another factor to add into the equation, which would say that not only in all likelihood is the guy dead, but an additional reason why we should assume that he didn't make it through. Perhaps he could be Mekel. On the other hand, we pointed out that Tosfos on the Gemara brought the opinion of Rabbi. Ravashi said that if the person who drowned was a Tzorba Merabanan, a famous person, then she could get married, because if he would have survived, we would have heard about it. Which implies that if you have two Roivs, you could be Mekel. And the Gemara says, no, even if the person is Tzorba Merabanan, you still can't get married. And Tosfos asks, why not? But you have two Roivs. And Tosfos says, well, even by two Roivs, you still can't get remarried. So this sort of rocks our boat, because that would indicate that even with an additional factor to be lenient, you still cannot be lenient. We pointed out, though, maybe only in a situation of a famous person you can't be lenient, because that's a individual exception. But if you had a factor which would apply to all cases, then perhaps you could be lenient. In other words, maybe we're only not lenient by a famous person because loy plug. In other words, we can't make exceptions for a certain class of people. But if you had an additional factor, we mentioned the factor, the Chsam Sofer, the Bizman Hazeh, there's technology, and if a person would have survived, we would have heard about it. Perhaps then you could be Mekel. Okay, today I want to start off talking about a similar story to the Titanic, just with one additional factor, and that is the factor of falling into the water. This is a tshuva, look at number 34. Tshuva near the Igros Moshe, about a guy who was on an airplane, and Layaleno, the airplane crashed into the English Channel, and we can't find him. So could the wife remarry? That's number 34, the Igros Moshe, Chilak Eben Ezer, Siman Mem Ches, Be'inyan Eidos Arkois, regarding the Eidos of the non-Jewish courts, Sha'ala the airplane nafal b'hayam. So Rav Moshe discusses the following factor. What if the officials have on their record that the guy died? Now, let's say the airline was a Russian airline, and the Russian government offers a proclamation, an unsolicited proclamation, everyone on the plane died. Is that real testimony? How do they know everybody died? Because a Gentile saw. Is that admissible testimony in our courts? So let's deal with this shaila. It says Rav Moshe Nebedvar Ha'aguna Yafa Kasavta She'edos Arkois Meha Var Department. You wrote correctly that any testimony from the Gentile War Department Shahidio Beha document, that they made it known through their document Sha'alaba airplane. In other words, how do we know the guy even got onto the plane? well, we have, two kosher Yidden who saw the guy got into the plane. No, they have on their records the guy got into the plane. Is that admissible evidence? The airplane zen nafal b'hayam hanoida b'shem English channel, the English channel, not to be confused with the History Channel. The English channel. He edus sheyesh lismay chalza. Says Rav Moshe, this is an admissible testimony. Mishum da arkois loy chashidi l'shaker, because we do not assume that a judicial department will lie, as some and others hold. So we can rely on the testimony of the War Department that this guy got on the plane and the plane crashed. The mishum da arkois loy chashidi l'shaker kedesavriach sam sover achronim v'gam im haidiyah kodim sheshala, and especially if they told the woman before she asked, so then there's no reason for us to assume that they're just feeding into her request, but they gave unsolicited information that the guy got onto the plane and the plane crashed. If they let her know before the time that she would have asked them, then this has an additional backing that they're not, it's one thing if somebody goes and officially tells you certain evidence, we could suspect maybe they have an agenda. But there's a concept of Mesiach Lefituma, that if somebody just says something in the course of conversation, they don't have any specific agenda. The truth comes out in the course of regular speaking. So then they're letting her know that her husband was on the plane and the plane crashed is Mesiach Lefitumai. Sharei lo hitzrichim lichtav lo klum. They didn't have to write her anything. Dem kvar hoist tzricha lishal hayazeh gamkein nidain kishe'ela shaleim lahashiv. If she needed to ask them, then this might be something that they would have to respond, kivin shiyadim shatishal. But if she didn't need to ask, adayin yesh lahafzeh kimsech lefitumai. In other words, this unsolicited offering of information is considered Mesiach Fitumai, and therefore it can be relied on. The only thing is, at best, all they know is he got on the plane and the plane crashed. But they don't know he died. And then he fell into Ma'im Shein Lahem Saif, which we can't rely that he died. Ach yesh ladon mishum shenafa l'mayim shein lahem saif. So l'chayra, it should be aser for her to remarry. Aval yafeh kasavta. But you wrote well, meaning the questioner, Rav Moshe is addressing the questioner, you are correct in that which you wrote. The yesh kan trei rubi. There are two robes here. The ruba me'elu anoiflim airplane apareach shugavaya ma'od mesim takeoff. Most people that fall from an airplane at a high altitude, they die immediately at impact. You don't have very, very rare that somebody would survive that kind of crash. The haroiv me'elush and and the miyot that did not die upon impact and fell into the sea, mesim, most of them drown. The achroinim atirim betray ruby. The achroinim say if you have two roivs, it's mutter. So what are the two roivs in this case? If someone just falls into Ma'im Shein Lahem Saif, it's one roiv. But in this case, the airplane crashed. Most people in a crash, they die. And even if they don't die, most people that drown, they die. Tosfos says we don't rely on two roivs. The Achroinim say we do. Says Rav Moshe, Aval Emes, the truth is, Shemi Tosfos Daf Kuf Chaf Aleph Muchach Shegam Betrei Rubi Asura Kekushas Hapeschei Tshuva.
I mean, the fact that nowadays they can put out massive search parties to find anyone who might have survived, doesn't factor into this. So that if he had survived, he would have been found.
Well, that was another roiv that we mentioned earlier. That's part of the modern technology, that if the guy is alive, how come we didn't find him? Now, maybe you'll say that Tosfos, it's not that Tosfos holds that we don't rely on two roivs. Maybe Tosfos holds that Sorba Merabanan Kala Islay Savi She'ein Roiv Kidaratzis Lafarish. Maybe there is no roiv that most famous people will hear about. But Rav Moshe rejects that. But in any event, look at Rav Moshe in the next paragraph. Al kapanami toisus muchach sha'asri b'trei ruba v'shaper hikshab hapeschetshuva al matirin. Says Rav Moshe, the truth is that it's a very good question. That all those who are matter by two roivs, Tosfos says explicitly that two roivs doesn't help. Aval ladina hamatirin ha'achroinim. But the truth is, the achroinim are matter. So it's true. Tosfos says two roivs is not a heter, but the achroinim say it is. So in halacha, you follow the Basra, you follow the later authorities, and the achroinim are willing to rely on two roivs. Now we've explained svaras from Rabbi Yitzchak Achanan why Tosfos is not a contradiction to relying on two roivs. Maybe the reason we don't rely on the roiv of Tzur Mirabana is because it's one particular exception. We have to do things across the board. Or one idea we mentioned is that the reason Tosfos doesn't hold of two roivs is because those roivs do not happen simultaneously. Do you remember this? Those roivs do not happen simultaneously. The two roivs of Tosfos are, one roiv is most people who fall into Mayim Shein Lahem Sof drown, and even if they didn't drown, if we don't know where they are now, the guy must have died. So it happens a little bit later, the second roiv. The second roiv of, well, if he didn't drown, so where is he? So he must be dead. That happens at a different time. So when the roivs happen at a different time, then Tosfos is not willing to rely on two roivs. But in this case of Rav Moshe, you could say maybe they do happen simultaneously. Either you die on impact in the water, or you drown in the water. Now it's not exactly the same time. Maybe you could clear. Now, what difference does it make if it's the same time or not? If you look at number 35 in the Shal Sechuvas, Aryeh Debei Eloi, a Rabbi Aryeh Leibish Lifshitz. He mentions that the concept of two roivs, think of it this way. If 90% is not good, why is 95% good? Like, is there really a line of demarcation between one roiv and two roivs? What's the difference?
Well, two rows don't multiply, you don't add.
Okay, but in terms of percentage, so he says that there is a difference. The concept of roiv is, you can't rely on one roiv. It's still a suffix. Two roivs becomes svek sveika. Svek sveika is usually mutter, but the law of svek sveika is the two sveikos have to be simultaneous. So look at number 35. He says, "L'fi anias daiti yesh l'taretz the hakaimalan heichi the mahani trei ruba." When two roivs help, have a k'trei sveikos. Then it's like two sveikos matirin svek sveika b'chol makayim, and we matter svek sveika everywhere. V'hainu trei sveikos b'shachada. That is two sveikos at one time. Aval is safek hasheni bala achar mikan. But if the second suffix happens later, einoi nidan b'svek sveika, it's not considered a svek sveika. And therefore he says, a few lines down, if the roiv hanidvam lemisa happens immediately, and the roiv tzur rabbanan kala isleis la'achar zman, let's say many days, the roiv that if somebody would have survived, they would have heard about it. Well, when would we have heard about it? It takes some time to say, well, we would have heard about it by now. It's sometime later. Therefore, you can't rely on two roivs. Masha ein kain, another two roivs, which happen simultaneously, you could rely on. But bottom line is, Rav Moshe doesn't get into how to explain why Tosfos is not a contradiction to following two roivs. Rav Moshe just says, Tosfos holds we don't follow two roivs, and the Achronim say we do. Look on the third line in Rav Moshe, number 34, the bottom right-hand paragraph. It says Rav Moshe furthermore, V'gam mistaber, it's also logical, shebenafila me airplane, shegavaya ma'oid, falling from a very high airplane, leka af miyot shenitzoylen. Not 10% survive. Not 1% survive. No one has ever survived an airplane that hit the ground. Furthermore, V'gam yeshut sarif, another heter. So one heter is two roivs. Most airplanes that hit the ground, most people die, and even if they didn't, they would drown. Number two, it's not even a roiv. If the airplane hit the ground, nobody survives. Number three, V'gam yeshut sarif mashe yosem eser shanim shlei nishma klum yimenu. it's been 10 years, we haven't heard a word about this guy. That the opinion of the Trumas Hadeshen in his Psakim and in the Chasam Sofer and Siman Ches and Samachei, Shev Izmanenu Kol Adam Ketzur Rabbanan. Nowadays, everyone has the status of a celebrity. Shekala Islay, we would hear about whether they survived. Mishum Shayidei Habe Doar, through the mail, V'Hatzaitungin, or the newspapers. Efshir Lahoida, Afilim Mitzvah, we could find out what's going on the other end of the world.
Anyone who survives a big plane crash would be news, because it's such a rare thing. You don't have to be a famous person.
Okay, right.
Just surviving that crash makes you famous. Yeah.
Okay, his point is, even without that, his point is that nowadays with the news, if somebody's alive, you're going to find out about it. You're right, and the fact that he would survive, he would become a celebrity. And adds Rav Moshe, the reason we don't hold of Tzurim Rabbanan, that if the person would have survived, we would have heard about it. Sha'am Rabbi Gemara, Mefarish Trumas Hadeshen, Mishum she'en lechalek b'gzeres chachamim. You can't start making differentiations in the gzeres of Chazal, what type of person we're dealing with. Litain hadavar l'shiurin. L'chein bizmanenu. Therefore, in our time, shekulam ketzur rabbanan. Yesh makom lahater be'avad zichrai. That if 10 years pass, let's say, and when there's no news of the guy's whereabouts, then we're going to matter it. V'mkein kol shekein ata b'yameinu. Certainly, in our times, shenoidim ap yoymecha mikol olam mamish. It's not like in the times of the Chasam Sofer that, we're going to read in the newspaper about what happened on the other end of the world. Says Rav Moshe, technology has advanced so much through the telegrams, through the telephones, shula'in mispar, yoiser mehiras. The telephones and the telegrams work much better, says Rav Moshe, in 1956. In the modern time, in 1956, the telegrams work much better than they used to. And you could extrapolate to our times, when someone sneezes on the other end of the world, everybody knows about it. They're going to put it up on social media. They're going to let you know what type of tissue they used. And you have a close-up shot of it. It's ki'ilu, you're there. They'll Skype you in, It's called TMI. Too much information, right? But certainly, traveling to our times, the Chadayim Shulain Mitzvah Yoiser Mehiras Mizman Chasam Sofer, much faster than times of Chasam Sofer. The Koshikim Mizman Trumas Hadeshen Yesh Makom Lahatir. So what's interesting is whatever Hatem Rav Moshe is giving is magnified 1,000-fold over the last 50 years. If somebody would have survived with what although how many people, the United States government looking for terrorists, how long it takes them to find them, where they are. All they have to do is they throw their cell phone out, and then nobody knows where anybody is. So I guess it works both ways.
Well, they're trying to hide. The person who survives the bankers is not necessarily trying to hide.
Okay. V'ulai ba'ofen zeh, says Rav Moshe, lo hayu mistapkin klal. Maybe in such a case there's no suffix even at all. V'hayu machlitin lahater, and it's definitive that it's mutter. So far we have another number of kulas in this case of the English Channel. Number one, there are two rives. The second rive is most people that crash, they die. Number two, it's not even a rive. Everybody who crashes does not survive. Number three, the Svar L'Chsam Sofer, that with technology, if the person would have survived, we would have heard about it, magnified to today. Number four now. If you remember, back in one of the earlier parts, there was a shita that Mordechai quoted from Rabbi Eliezer Mivardun that Chazal don't say Ma'im Shein Lahem Soif Loi Tinasei Oilamis. It doesn't say she can never get married. It says she can't get married. But it's up to the Chazal to say, you know what? It's already 7 years and we still haven't heard from this guy. Of course she's not going to get married, but not indefinitely. There is a time can come for the Chachamim to evaluate and say, okay, so she taka listened and she didn't get married, but now she could get married. But that was the chiddush of Rabbi Eliezer Mivardun, that it was not a eternal iser. It's just until the chachamim see fit. Then shebe'etzem din ma'im shalom matel achar harbe sham shemashar mechachmei adar. The Yerushalayim, when the God-fearing sages feel it's time, sikvar in this topic. Who remembers who argued on the Mordechai and Rabbi Eliezer Mivardun? The Beis Yosef. It says Rav Moshe v'yav shemasik shecholkin olav. Even though we conclude to argue on him and to asa forever, mikol makom, Shita shal Rishonim hi. It is an opinion of the Rishonim, and you could rely on it. Now Rav Moshe says a very interesting svara. Says Rav Moshe, there were 3 people on the airplane. I guess it was a personal jet, and 2 of them were found dead in the water. So that's a raiv. Because if there are 3 people on the airplane and 2 of them were found dead, we should follow the raiv that this guy is dead. Says Rav Moshe, if anything, that's a reason to be machmer in this case. Because if there are 3 people on the plane and 2 of them are found dead, and the other guy we don't know about, so why wasn't he found dead? You know why? Because he's in the British Museum right now. That's why. You know, he's alive. That's why he's not found dead. So it says Rav Moshe, don't use that roiv to prove he's dead. If anything, it's slightly indicative of the opposite. It says Rav Moshe, Oman shekosavta sheish oid roiv b'kan gufei shahaya b'ha airplane shloisha anashim v'hashnayim nimtzu meisim al hamayim im kein yesh leilech basar ruba. That we should follow the roiv, the kan gufei loimer shagam zeh shusimeis. Says Rav Moshe, no yesh lefakbek. The nema leidach gisa. Let's say the other way. The midoloi nimtza meis. The fact that we didn't find him dead, kashnayim, like the other 2. Uvehechach nishtanim roiv. Obviously, he's different than the roiv. Maybe the reason he's different from the roiv is because he's alive. Efshar shu mitzad shu chai v'nitzul eizamakim. So says Rav Moshe, we're not going to go so far as to say that she can't remarry. We're not going to use this as a deficiency in the chazaka. We're not going to say that's a proof that he's alive, because a lot of people drown that we don't find. But to prove from there that he died, you could say not like that. But as Rav Moshe concludes, to lemaisa mater, the woman, you need to set up a bezdin and have bezdin deliberate, and she should be present as the bezdin deliberates. So Rav Moshe is mekel, but again, this is not really going to help us that much for the Titanic, because Rav Moshe's main kula is the second roiv, that it wasn't just someone fell out of a boat, it was someone fell out of a plane, and that's another roiv, or even more than a roiv. Yes, Rav Moshe throws in other factors, technology, so why don't we know where they are, and he throws in the factor that after many years you can remater it, but it's pretty clear the main svara lahater is the additional factor that they fell out of a plane. Would Rav Moshe say in the case of a Titanic, where it's only one roiv, but many years have passed, and with all the technology, would he still be mekel? We don't have evidence he would be mekel even in that case. But there's one additional factor that I'll conclude with that is a very reasonable svara lahakel for those who survive the Titanic, and that will be number 37. Number 37. Okay, this is Shal Shechuvas Maharsham, Chilek Gimel, Siman Reish Nun Beis, where basically someone fell off of a boat, but the Marsham, Rav Shalom Mordechai Shvadron, one of the Poiskei Hadar at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, he says, Me'oz Higyani Mechtava V'nei B'dvar Ishes Raberel Vinker, the wife of Raberel Vinker, Kfi Shekasav Harav Mi Providence, Mi Prava Demens, Sha'asa Kol Agvias Eidos, Sha'achar Shakara Ha'asan Shinizra Svina, after the accident that the boat broke, V'tei Chamayim, V'oid Shahaya HaKar Gadol Ma'oid, it was a cold one that night. B'leil Chav Zayin Shvat, Tafrei Samach Zayin. So it was a cold night, and the boat broke. U'lamachras Shatu L'sham Aniyos U'malachim. The lifeboats and the sailors got there in a hurry. L'hoitzi Nidbam B'tei Hayam, to get those who drowned out. V'huva Yosem Yeshishim Nidbam. And they saved 60 people. Uv'toicham Rav Beryl Winkler, one of the guys, was Rav Beryl Winkler. V'chol makirav hikiru heitev b'tfias ayin. Everyone who saw him recognized him well. V'lo haya tefuch klal migadol hakarach v'hakar. And it's not like his body swelled. You see, very often, if you take a body out of the water, and people say, yeah, I know it's him. When you know it's him. Somebody drowns, the body, the face swells up. Maybe it's somebody else. It looks like the person now because of the swelling. No, but it was so cold, there was no swelling. Basically, they found his body dead. And the people say, this is Beryl Winkler. Now, normally we can't always rely on what people say because the body gets distorted in the water, but it was so freezing that he was preserved exactly. We know for sure he's on the boat. And and they found a letter on him, a receipt that Beryl Winkler gave a watch to his watchmaker to fix, and he was carrying it on him. Everyone recognized him as Barak Yehuza. And Bechlal, even without that, he had drowned in water ad shetetze nafshe. So even if we didn't find the body, if we just would have known that he drowned, we should be able to matter him. So look, if you find the body, there's nothing to talk about. But the question is, what about people they didn't find the body? Says the Marsham, Ulam Ikar Hasafik al Ishes Rabero Steiner. So Rabero Winkler, Nebuch, they brought out his body, they recognized him. He had the birthmark that everybody knew about. Everybody knew this was Rabero Winkler. Fine. But what about Rabero Steiner? Rabero Steiner, they never found his body. We had Eidos, he was also on the boat. They didn't find him. And the halacha is, even if we saw him go under, the amount of time, Providence, the rabbi from Providence, so l'chayra, if Rabbi Steiner, we don't know where he is, so the wife, l'chayra, should not be able to remarry. However, the rabbi from Providence, he wants to say, because it was very cold, to the point where even people who went onto the lifeboats, and after 4 hours, the people that they rescued in the lifeboats, they were very far from the coast, about 10 miles away. English, Milan Anglios, about 10 English miles away. Even the people that made it onto the lifeboats, more than half of them froze to death. In other words, let's say they rescued 100 people on the lifeboats, 50 of them died of hypothermia or of frostbite.
After they pulled them out of the water.
After they got them out of the water. From the air. But even the 50% that survived, they could not move a limb of their body until they brought them to the hospital. And with the help of doctors, they regained the function of some of their limbs. So just, you could paint the picture how cold it was. 50% of the people that went right onto the lifeboats never fell into the water. Bechlal died. 50% of the people in that freezing cold trip from the middle of the ocean to the coast, they died of frostbite. The other 50% could not move a limb, and they regained control of some of them. Now one person there left unamputated. Even the people that were survived, they all had some toes or fingers or arms cut off. Gam hoya b'layla zu choshech v'afela. It was also very dark. L'machras nishluchu l'sham kama aniyos malachim. The chipsu chipis mechupas al kol afike hamayim v'al gadoisav. And it was very dark. And the next day they sent many boats. Umatzu erach peinit ba'amesim. The next morning they found another 80 bodies, and they're all dead, obviously. The only thing is, Bey's shin is not found. Rav Beryl Steiner, he wasn't on the first lifeboat. His body was not laying in the water. Says the Marsham Yeshlar Medbechihai Gavna Shaya Kargado. In such a case, where it's not regular Mayim Shein Lahem Soif, it's freezing waters. Shaya Kargado, because Ad Shagam Oisin Shekivtu Toich Aniyos Hamiflad Heviu Elachem Nikvul Kalibram Bechatzi Mesu. It was so cold that even the people who got onto the lifeboats, they basically all died. But certainly none of them was able to move a limb. So this Beis Shin, this Beryl Steiner who fell into the water, there's no question, he also was in a situation where he couldn't move. Now, not being able to move and being in water is not a good combination. We don't have to worry that maybe he encountered a raft. The Nitzo, the Kim, the Nidan did not have a Kishoat Shetetz Nafshai. And you're only dealing with the subject Rabbanan to begin with, of Mayim Shelam Saif. In such a case, Loi Gazru Chazal. Well then, this might be a very strong reason to be makel in the case of the Titanic, because they were not cruising along, Florida or any resort areas in near South America. Yeah, they were exactly. The iceberg gashed open the hull of the ship. So you're in the northern Arctic. These are definitely Mayim Karim. And besides the roiv that most people drown in Mayim Shein Lahem Soif, the very, very cold conditions certainly add an additional factor. And that might be ultimately another heter for the tragic case of the Titanic. So, Mirz Hashem, I think the plan is tomorrow to finish this up, and the Ezra Hashem, hope to see everyone tomorrow.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.